It's time for the 1430 Connection on 1430 WNAV and 99.9 FM, spotlighting news, newsmakers, and important community issues. Now, with this week's edition of the 1430 Connection, here is WNAV news anchor Donna Cole.
Welcome to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Cole. In the studio with me today, again, it's all about the birds. You know me, and these three women are lifesavers. They are my heroes. I'll start with Lisa Smith. She's the Executive Director of Tri-State Bird Rescue and Research out of Newark, Delaware. She came the farthest, and thank you very much for driving in today.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, Donna.
Paula Goldberg is the former Executive Director of City Wildlife in Washington, D.C. She's still very involved with the organization, including serving on the Board of Directors. Thank you, Paula, for joining me.
And thank you, Donna, for inviting me.
And then Kathy Woods, the founder and director of Phoenix Wildlife Center in Phoenix, Maryland, just outside of Baltimore. The reason these three women are in the studio today is they cover our listener area. So if you have an injured bird or an injured squirrel in some cases, like City Wildlife in Phoenix, these are the women you're going to want to know, and these are the organizations you're going to want to know. Tri-State, Lisa, is just birds.
That is correct, except for during oil spills.
And oil spills, you do have a significant oil spill response team, and this is important not just in the Gulf of Mexico, not just in the Atlantic Ocean, right here in the Chesapeake Bay watershed area.
Absolutely. There's a lot of shipping on Chesapeake Bay, so there's always the potential for some kind of spill.
And is it true that you use Dawn for detergent?
We did use Dawn up until about a year ago. We periodically do testing on all the different detergents, and we have recently switched to palm olive.
Ah, okay. Something new learned today. Mm-hmm. Most famous rescue that you've had to date? This one's for Lisa. Again, she's the Executive Director of Tri-State Bird Rescue and Research.
So recently, we had one of the bald eaglets from the National Arboretum that came into care, that first came to City Wildlife and then was transferred to us. And that was a very high-profile case. Unfortunately, the eagle had West Nile disease and did not survive.
Sad. Paula, we already know what yours is, and all three of you do share resources. So if you need to transfer the bird somewhere else.
You know, one of the shortcomings that City Wildlife has is that we don't have outdoor caging, so that when birds get strong enough, or if they are so large that they need outdoor caging for flight acclimation, or they need very specialized continued care, that's when we call upon our colleagues to get the bird transferred, an animal transferred to where it needs to go. For continued care, and that was the case with the bald eaglet that came into our care last summer and was transported fairly quickly to Tri-State.
But your most famous rescue?
Oh, our most famous rescue was a snowy owl that collided with a metro bus in the middle of the night in late January of 2014. The bird was in care with us for 10 days and then was quietly transported up to Tri-State. The bird was transferred from Tri-State to the University of Minnesota Raptor Center, where it had feathers replaced and it was flight conditioned. And apparently it was very successfully released and lived very well for a couple of months, which is my understanding, and then unfortunately met its demise when it supposedly collided with a truck or a car.
Kathy,
yes,
you do a lot of work with Lights Out Baltimore, but it's not just Lights Out. So Lights Out Baltimore is out, especially during migration season, picking up birds that have hit windows around the Baltimore area. So you are nonstop busy right now.
We've just finished this fall season. Just finished, yes.
And most famous rescue in recent history?
Recent history for Lights Out,
for Lights Out.
For Lights Out, we did a yellow rail, which hadn't been seen in Baltimore since the 1800s. That's amazing. That was pretty fabulous. We got to rehab him and release him. Before that, we got a booby. And it had It had been seen in downtown Baltimore by Nico Sarbanes, who's a friend of ours, and everybody flocked to downtown Baltimore to see it.
I remember it was out on the water, in Inner Harbor.
Yeah.
And then several months went by, and it was a really, really, really windy day, and the booby came down under our Key Bridge, and they transported it to us, and they told us it was a gull, which was lovely, and on the front porch, we opened the box. My husband opened the box, And then he closed the box. And he said, I think you need to come here. So I called Tri-State for guidance, and they basically told me what to do, and we fed him for a few days, and then we took him to Cape May and dropped him off a ferry in the middle of off of a whale watching
That's
boat,
amazing.
right in the middle of the ocean, which was their suggestion.
Do each of you still go out on the releases?
Oh, yes.
It's got to be so special, yeah?
It is. Sometimes it's a little frustrating because, and I was just lamenting with a city wildlife colleague of mine recently about this. But birds will never take off in the direction that you hope they will. So last summer I released 2 turkey vultures on Kent Island. One had come from Kent Island, and we think that it either had been struck by a light airplane or a car. And its roommate was a young turkey vulture that had come from Montgomery County, Maryland. And I found a quiet place along the road that transects Kent Island, and sure enough, I mean, you can aim the box one way, and of course this bird is going to just fly over your head in the opposite direction, and
Right over towards the road.
and right over toward the road or the airport, and it's a little harrowing, but I think both of these birds at least ended up doing fine.
Kathy, you still go out on the releases?
I generally don't anymore. I really don't. I'll release the little ones. I have more pictures of boxes.
But that's a good sign.
That's a great sign, right? I'm holding the box and I'm putting it on the ground, and then I have my little iPhone and I'm trying to take a picture for Lindsay.
Right.
It lights out. She always says, "Take a picture of that last woodcock. Take a picture of that last woodcock." And 10 woodcocks later, you're still on your last woodcock. And so I have lots of pictures of boxes because by the time I open it, it's taken off.
Right.
So the booby, I don't do well on boats. So my husband actually did that. He just took a little crate on board and put it under the seats, and I think most people thought he had a puppy or something on board. But as somebody
don't
said,
release a puppy off
right, right. But like somebody said at the Animal Bird Club, who takes a booby on the whale watching thing? So when they'd finished seeing the whales, he just opened the crate and dumped him over. So I do not do a lot of the releases. My heart just
Can't take it, huh?
well,
Yeah.
I generally will send somebody else who can just follow the instructions and do. We will still do it with the folks who found the bird. I think Tri-State does the same way.
Lisa?
And,
So we release some birds on site, and I try to, tear myself away from my office to go watch that, which is usually pretty amazing. When they're released off-site, we often send them back with volunteers.
To where they came from.
Yeah, or suitable habitat,
Right.
yeah.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back and talk more about wildlife rescue. This is Donna Cole on the 1430 Connection. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the 1430 Connection. I'm in the studio today with Kathy Wood. She's the founder and director of the Phoenix Wildlife Center in Phoenix, Maryland. It's just outside of Baltimore. Paula Goldberg is the former executive director of City Wildlife in Washington, D.C., still very active with the organization, still serving as a board member. And Lisa Smith, executive director of Tri-State Bird Rescue and Research in Newark, Delaware. Ladies, let's talk about, before we start running out of time, because we do like to talk, the biggest issues that plague birds today. Lisa.
So we find with our caseload, we get about 2,500 birds a year, and about 70% of the birds that are brought to us, we can trace it back to some sort of man-made cause of injury. So they may have flown into a window, they may have been hit by a car, they may have been attacked by a cat, they may have been entrapped in fishing line. So when we do know the cause of injury, we find a lot of times inadvertently done, but it is the human effect on the landscape.
Lead? You want to address that, Kathy?
lead. All of our bald eagles, we actually bought a lead test kit, and I'm sure Tri-State has one, and
Yep.
so does you guys. And we immediately, when they come in, anything, a bald eagle or a vulture, sometimes owls even, will have eaten a carcass with lead shot in it. So we're able to treat right away. If you send the blood out, it takes about a week to get it back, but we all three have our on-site lead test kits.
Is it a huge issue?
It's a huge issue, yes.
Yeah.
Lead shot
Yeah,
is still...
it's an enormous issue. I mean, city wildlife is based in Washington, D.C., and any American city has issues with lead. Now, the precedent has been, and it's usually a regulatory issues, that children, infants, need to be tested for lead at least twice in their infancy, so they can be screened for it and treated for it. But we're finding out that, as Kathy said, and as Lisa well knows, that wildlife is constantly exposed to lead, either through eating lead shot that is dissolved in carcasses, or in the case of pigeons and doves, birds that peck along the ground. If they're anywhere near a construction site, that these birds are going to be picking up particulate lead and ingesting it. And at city wildlife, it's gone a little bit farther, because it's not unusual for us to get positive lead readings in opossums and squirrels.
Wow.
And they've had to have been treated for it as well.
All three of you know that I did some reporting earlier this year on the 13 bald eagles that were killed in Federalsburg, Maryland, and 5 that were killed in Easton, Maryland, and got the chemical results, and we know that carbofuran killed these birds. A U.S. Fish and Wildlife Special Agent, John LaCourte, was quoted in the Post. He said there's an epidemic of wildlife poisonings on the eastern shore. I know that there are going to be more cases of carbofuran, and I have another FOIA out. Why is this happening? And Lisa, you and Kathy deal with eastern shore wildlife poisonings. Lisa, why do you think this is going on?
So usually when a bald eagle comes in, or any raptor comes in with that kind of poisoning, it tends to be what we call secondary poisoning. Mm-hmm. So someone has put out some kind of poison, and there's also, we see this with the rodenticides that are anticoagulants. So we see it in rodenticides. We do see it in the carbofuran as well. People put out poisons to kill pests. And then when the animals die, whether it's rodents or some other animal that whoever is putting out the poison is targeting, the raptors come down and feed on that carcass, and then they are poisoned. So, we treat them as best we can, but a lot of times it's very fast acting, and there can be very high mortality from it.
It's very toxic to, it's toxic to humans also, but it's very toxic to birds, kills not necessarily right away the animal that has been traveling with this in their system. It's, from what I understand, a horrible, ugly, painful death. Kathy?
I don't really have that much experience with it, except for the ones on the eastern shore that we got. We got the 4 eastern birds, and but years before that, we had actually gotten one in northern Baltimore County, and somebody had poisoned. Probably this is just speculation. Put poison down a groundhog hole. It was a farmer. They didn't like the big holes that were in the fields. They'd put some poison down, and the male bald eagle. It was a pair with 2 eaglets, and the male had actually eaten the groundhog. It was right there, and he came down right there in the cornfield, clenched feet, and the people around there saw him, and I, of course, thought he was just happily eating a groundhog and didn't respond for about 2 more hours. And by the time I got there, we were actually able to treat him and release him back there. But I know U.S. Fish and Wildlife walked miles and miles and miles and miles just trying to find any other evidence.
I know they're frustrated, and I know they do their job.
I don't know what to do as far as the education for the farmers. I think that they have it stockpiled. I mean, it was taken off the market many years ago. Right. It's probably stockpiled, and we're never going to find out who's doing it. So, I mean, the rewards were over $25,000 in the Federalsburg ones, were they, or were they the Eastern Shore ones? I'm not sure.
Yeah,
but that's a lot of money, and to not have anybody come forward, there's a problem somewhere.
We're going to take another short break. This is Donna Cole on the 1430 Connection. We will be right back. Welcome back to the 1430 Connection. I'm in the studio with Lisa Smith, Executive Director of Tri-State Bird Rescue and Research in Newark, Delaware. Paula Goldberg, she's former Executive Director of City Wildlife in Washington, D.C. She's still a board member, very active with the organization. And Kathy Woods, the founder and director of Phoenix Wildlife Center in Phoenix, Maryland. If you found a bird or injured squirrel, these are the women you want to know about. And you are not open 24/7, but you have phones.
Tri-State Bird Rescue is open from 9 a.m. to 5 5 p.m. every day.
365 days of the year. That's important.
Right.
Yeah.
And City Wildlife is open from 9 to 5 every day of the year, 365 days a year.
And so is the Phoenix Wildlife Center.
Okay.
Yes.
As far we're in Annapolis right now, I know that City Wildlife is the closest. That's why you're here, Paula.
Right.
For those up around northern Anne Arundel County, Baltimore area, it's definitely Phoenix. And for those that are listening on the Eastern Shore, tri-state or Phoenix. You need volunteers to do what you do.
Absolutely.
Lisa, let's start with you. And for those that are in this area, don't think that you have to go to Newark, Delaware to help you.
Absolutely. Especially because there is no other rehabilitation facility for native wild birds on the Delmarva Peninsula. We do get a lot of birds from the eastern shore of Maryland. We get calls regularly from Salisbury, from Ocean City, Maryland, all those areas. Occasionally we even get birds from Chincoteague. So we rely on a network of volunteers who can help transport injured birds to our facility for treatment.
Paula, City Wildlife?
Right. We rely on very heavily on volunteers to do animal care at the center, as well as for transport. For those of you who've been to City Wildlife, we've got a very lean crew of paid staff members, and we basically function on volunteers who do all sorts of things.
It's amazing to see, and I have been there, and you know that I've been there because my neighbor and I tried to rescue a blue heron, but he was too far gone. Kathy, volunteers needed
all the time.
All the time.
We still are 100% volunteer run. I'm proud to say that. Maybe next year when we move to our new center, we'll have some paid staff, but we're still 100% volunteer run, and I can always use that person. It's generally somebody who drops off an animal who will say to you, hey, I'd really like to volunteer for you, but I work and I'm only available then. And I write down when they're available and what they can transport and what they're willing to transport, and then we teach them how to do it, and it's very successful. And they're the heart of the organization, really.
Lisa, you do it. You have like a relay set up so that if I don't want to drive all the way to Newark, I can probably meet somebody halfway.
Correct. Yeah, we often have, like I said, we have a network of volunteers. So we have some pretty regular places that we use. We use a 301 rest stop as a transfer point very frequently, right? Because people do not necessarily have to drive from Annapolis all the way up to Newark. And sometimes it takes 2 or 3 volunteers to get a bird up to our facility.
Paula, with regard to not birds, with wildlife, I mean, some of the photos that you've shared on social media, the little baby squirrels with cast, it's insane. It's just amazing the work you all do.
Well, thank you.
What other kind of wildlife? There's a lot in Rock Creek Park. Do you see it all? Or?
Well, we do. The diversity never ceases to amaze me. So Rock Creek Park is a throughway for migratory birds. So, we've seen everything from American bitterns to unusual warblers coming through that have unfortunately hit glass or been hit by cars. And then we see a diversity of small mammals. We don't take in any rabies vector species, and I would caution anybody who lives in Maryland not to cross state lines with an animal that's considered rabies vector species. So this would include coyotes, foxes, raccoons, bats, or skunks. But we do see many woodchucks, lots of opossums, chipmunks, flying squirrels, you name it. And then because we are at the intersection of the Anacostia and Potomac rivers, we see a number of turtles, and many of the turtles that do come into care at City Wildlife are species of greatest conservation need. It's always a kindness to, even if you're, some people have been, sort of concerned about whether an animal might be hurt or not. We usually coach them on the phone like Lisa and Kathy do, and then try to make a determination whether or not an animal needs help and whether it actually needs to come in for care.
All 3 of these organizations are on Facebook. All 3 have websites. Kathy, Phoenix Wildlife Center, the website is what?
PhoenixWildlife.org.
Paula?
CityWildlife.org.
And Lisa?
TriStateBird.org.
Okay, the most famous bird in the world right now, this has nothing to do with our area, but the most famous bird in the world right now, the mandarin duck in Central Park. Yeah, what's your philosophy on how it got there, Lisa?
Well, the bird clearly has a band on its leg, so I think it's escaped from somebody's collection.
I agree.
Likewise, I do. I
Have
think
you
it's
ever
a
seen
pet.
one of these birds?
No. No, I have in a zoo.
Yeah,
they have them in
I've seen them in
zoos.
captivity.
And speaking of these rare birds and snowy owl season,
Oh, yes.
give the birds their space. Do not force them to fly. Do not feed them. Anything I missed there?
I think if they turn their heads to look at you, you're too close.
Yeah.
They can tell, and even if for a photographer, if they're facing one direction but turn around to look at you, it might be a perfect shot, but like Lisa said, you're too close.
And no flash photography. Limit flash photography with birds. There's no reason to put a flash into a bird's eyes. Yeah.
Correct.
Right. And what is the danger of getting too close to them? I've heard of one sad story, and I don't know whether it was from last year or the previous year, that someone had gotten very close to a snowy owl, and the snowy owl spooked and actually flew into a car and was mortally injured.
These birds come down from the Arctic. They need their rest. They need their space to hunt. They do not need humans in their way.
Exactly.
Yes. Correct.
Thank you all for joining me today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Donna.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for inviting us.
This is
fun.
This is Donna Cole in the 1430 Connection. We will see you next week.